Hey, what's up, American history students? Welcome to May 15th, 2020, day 37 of our COVID-19 stay-at-home e-learning experience. It is Friday. Happy Friday. We made it through another week. Made it through a excellent, in my opinion, Zoom meeting yesterday. Remember, those Zoom meetings are every Thursday at 11, so if you didn't make this week's Zoom meeting, make sure you're there for next week's. As I said in the video yesterday, those Zoom meetings are for participation grades. So doesn't mean you have to talk, doesn't mean you have to show your face, just means you have to log in. You log into that Zoom meeting, you get all the participation points. If you skip the Zoom meeting, meaning I don't hear from you and you don't show up, then you get a 0 for participation for that day. So if you can't make it to a Zoom meeting, make sure you let me know so I can exempt you from it so it doesn't negatively impact your grade. It's a small part of your grade. Most of your grade is from the work you're doing on Blackbaud, but that is part of your grade. It can only help bring your grade up by making sure you're in on those Zoom meetings. And I think they're pretty fun and informative. I had a good time yesterday. But again, grades are important because midterm grades came out this week on Wednesday. And after today, we have 3 weeks left in the term. So you still got time. If your midterm grade wasn't where you wanted it to be, you still got time to bring it up. But the clock's ticking, right? So we need to get started on getting caught up. And if your grade's in a good place right now, we need to keep it that way, right? We don't want to slack off for the last 3 weeks of the term because that could, go down. So, that being said, let's take a look at what's on the agenda for Blackbaud. Let's go ahead and get out of here, get on our Blackbaud page. There we are on the bulletin board. Again, there's that message about the Zoom meetings every week from 11 to 11:30. Yesterday in the Zoom meetings, we spent a lot of time talking about JFK. The 60s in general, but John F. Kennedy, the Kennedy family, the Kennedys, is a big enough topic to take up a whole term worth of classes, a whole week at least. So to spend just 30 minutes mostly talking about JFK, that we still only scratched the surface. So much so that I remember at the beginning of yesterday's meeting I said, well, we got to talk about Cuba. You can't talk about JFK without talking about Cuba. And guess what? We didn't talk about Cuba. We got through all that stuff and we never even got to Cuba. And Cuba was such a big deal. Why is Cuba such a big deal? Well, Cuba is a communist country. That's right. They're commies, right? Fidel Castro was the revolutionary who overthrew the dictator of Cuba, took over, and became the communist leader of Cuba. And he was in power for 40 years or something ridiculous. Eventually, he got old and he handed power over to his brother, Raul Castro, who is still in power, who's still the leader of Cuba. Castro is still in charge, and Cuba is still communist. And America, to this day, still has a difficult relationship with Cuba. It's gotten better in recent years, but we still don't like Cuba, and they don't like us very much. And that's kind of what the assignment for today and the question of the day get at, right? If we go into our assignments tab, let's see. The assignment, right, is chapter 22, section 3. And if we open that up, we see it's all about foreign policy. If we go to the download link is right here. Let's see what comes up when we download it. Yeah, foreign policy in the early 1960s. And if we scroll down, there's Fidel Castro right there. And who's he hugging? Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of the USSR, Russia, Soviet Union. So these two commies, they're best buds, right? And America is a little uneasy about the fact that we got a commie, a revolutionary, right in our backyard. Because that's the thing. Russia's way over there. Cuba is right here, right? And so from the very start, as soon as Castro takes over, Kennedy and the U.S. government is thinking about ways to get rid of Castro, get those commies out of Cuba. And that's what leads to this thing called the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was the United States, the CIA secretly supporting people from Cuba who had escaped Cuba, who didn't want to be communists. They escaped Cuba, We trained them and armed them and said, you're going to invade Cuba, overthrow Castro, and we'll help you, take over Cuba and get rid of those communists. That was the plan, and it was a miserable failure. And the consequences of this military catastrophe at the Bay of Pigs was that Castro decides, I need protection. And the way he gets protection is nuclear missiles from Russia that they begin shipping to and setting up in Cuba. Nuclear missiles that could take out the entire United States, all set, ready to launch, sitting right there in Cuba. And this leads to something called the Cuban Missile Crisis that John F. Kennedy had to deal with, and that because John F. Kennedy dealt with it the way he dealt with it, he saved us from nuclear war. The military wanted to start a nuclear war with Cuba and the Soviet Union. All the top guys in the military wanted to do it, and John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief of the military, stood up and said, no, we're not going to do that. We got to do something different, because nuclear war would be a disaster for everybody. So he saved the world, right? Pissed off a lot of people in doing that, right? We talked about all the potential people behind the Kennedy assassination. I think the most popular theory in the Zoom meeting yesterday, and the one that I admit seems most plausible, was that it was the mob, the mafia. The mob put a hit on John F. Kennedy, and that's was the conspiracy. But then, the mob had things against Kennedy. Communists like Lee Harvey Oswald definitely had things against Kennedy. But the CIA, and the military, and people in the government that Kennedy went against, right? They wanted to expand the Cold War, and Kennedy wanted to reduce it. And so he could have pissed off the wrong people. And not to mention, don't forget Jacqueline Kennedy. She could be a suspect. He cheated on his wife all the time. Maybe she set it up. Probably not. But I think it could have been people in the military, people in the CIA, because especially with Cuba, not to mention Vietnam, Kennedy made a lot of enemies, powerful, dangerous enemies within our own military and government. But that's just my theory. Point is, he went against the military and saved us all from nuclear war. So that's good. But he also, he stood up to the Soviets, stood up to the communists, Kennedy did, as did his vice president, LBJ. But the Soviets, they wanted to push the issue. They wanted to see how far they could push this young, new president in Kennedy. And they also wanted their goal always was to expand communism all over the globe. We saw that, beginning with Stalin and Truman trying to contain the spread of communism. Well, Truman's gone by this point, and so the Soviets once again are like, well, now it's time to get back to spreading communism, and Kennedy had to stand up to him again, just like Truman did before him. One consequence of that was the construction of the Berlin Wall, which you will see in this chapter. And so, it's a pretty packed chapter, lots of information, but as always, there's just we scroll on down to the 4 questions, right, which are here in the assignment. You can either submit them through the Google Form submission or through the online submission. And then, of course, we have the question of the day. So let's go back to the question of the day. If we go back to assignments, question of the day. How do you think America should deal with countries like the Soviet Union, like Cuba, like North Korea, that don't like us, that might see us as rivals or adversaries or enemies? How should we deal with our enemies? Kill them all, let God sort them out? Just nuke them all? Should we try and make friends with them? Should we, refuse to do trade with them unless they behave in a way that we think is... There's lots of different options on the table. Kennedy, I would say, was one who, was not like, let's just, kill them. Let's just go to war with our enemies. Let's be tough and kill them all. He was a veteran. He had served in war. He knew what it was about. Other presidents, and when we look throughout our history, have different approaches, right? President Trump has a different approach to how America should deal with our enemies. Different approach than President Obama, who had a different approach than George W. Bush. What I want to know is what you think is the best approach. How do you think America should deal with countries or governments or people who don't like us? No wrong, no right answer. Just want to know your opinion. So go ahead and answer the question of the day, answer the questions for the readings, and most of all, have a good, safe weekend, and I will see y'all on Monday. Peace.